throwing light today on I shall be throwing light today on the different techniques that are in place nowadays found in typing of these bacteria or microorganisms in general, and limitations of each technique. So if I go into detail of each technique, individual technique can be a separate chapter on itself, but I shall be just briefing you about the different techniques that are in place available, and essentially the choice of technique depends upon the laboratory. So if the laboratory is well equipped and there is no problem of any funding, so even the best of the best technique can be used. Otherwise, depending upon the resources and the funds available, we can even compromise for the best technique, but still attain a very good result with some low cost techniques that can be routinely followed in most of the diagnostic laboratories. So just give me a moment, I'll share the screen.
అర్జెంట్ గా ఏమి కావాలి అనే విషయం
Sir, is my screen visible?
Yes, it is visible. Make it in the presentation mode.
I have made it in the presentation mode, sir, but it's not visible in the presentation mode, is it?
No. Or you just start the slideshow, then share the slideshow.
Is it okay now?
No, it is hanging. Unshare and reshare.
Yes, yes, sir. The topic that was assigned to me was fingerprinting techniques of microbes, and I really appreciate the AICTE that is conducting this Atal Academy for Online Faculty Development Program that is going to be very useful for all the faculties, especially newly recruited assistant professors and other students. So my contents of my presentation shall be like this. So I'll be starting with a brief introduction on DNA fingerprinting, followed by microbial DNA fingerprinting, and then we shall directly jump on to the different techniques that are in place, namely the restriction endonuclease analysis of chromosome, followed by restriction endonuclease analysis of plasmid DNA, that is REAP, the RFLP technique and ribotyping, that is number 5. Then we have this random amplification of polymorphic DNA, that is RAPD. Then we have some new techniques like the repetitive sequence based PCR, also called as REP-PCR, the pulse field gel electrophoresis, PFGE, the AFLP technique, the much newer and new generation techniques like the multi-locus sequence typing and the whole genome sequencing. So many of you would have already heard about these topics, some of these topics, and might have a slight idea about this. So it might be a little bit much clearer when I end this presentation. So if I consider, for example, the whole genome sequencing or the multi-locus sequence typing, so that can be a separate chapter as a whole. If I start from the isolation of the bacteria until the analysis of the sequence results, so that can become a complete presentation. So I won't go into much detail. I shall only be explaining the brief workflow of each of the following techniques. I request other participants to please mute yourselves. So coming to the introduction, so earlier you all know the microorganisms were generally detected based on the morphological, physiological and cultural characteristics that are still followed in most of the state agricultural universities and different diagnostic laboratories. The first choice of detection when we receive any sample is either we culturally characterize or through morphological examination the bacteria or the whatever pathogen we can detect. But these phenotyping methods they are dependent on the products of gene expression. So whatever phenotypic characters we see, they are basically the final result of the gene that are being expressed in the bacteria or virus. Now, these genes or the products of this gene expression, that is the proteins, for example, they are very much dependent on the different environmental factors. So temperature or some mutation or the growth phase during the bacteria may vary the levels of these products in the gene expression that may indirectly affect the phenotypic characteristics. So therefore, we have some problems related to reproducibility and untypeability by these conventional methods. Therefore, we have, with the advances in molecular genetic techniques, our ability to identify and characterize these microorganisms has immensely enhanced, and therefore the newer techniques that I'm going to discuss has come into place. So basically, all of you know what is DNA fingerprinting during undergraduates as well as during, if we have studied biotechnology or biochemistry, during our postgraduate, we would have come across this technique. It is a way wherein identification of certain individual rather than a sample identifying a species or a particular trait. So it's a manner in which we can identify. This technique is used by the scientists to distinguish between individuals of the same species during using the samples of their DNA from any crime scene or investigation, or any sample from which we can isolate the DNA. It was first invented in 1985 by Sir Alex Jeffreys, the DNA fingerprinting technique. So now, coming to the microbial DNA fingerprinting, so most of the microbial DNA fingerprinting, the methods, they mainly rely on the DNA visualization methods. So these DNA visualization methods, that is, whenever we run the DNA on any solid medium, later we have to visualize that DNA in the form of autoradiography or a UV fluorescence, etc. So the DNA banding patterns that we observe are so-called the fingerprints. Techniques employ PCR and restriction site analysis. So this DNA will be having different sites for restriction endonuclease digestion, and these two techniques are explored in order to get different banding patterns. And the position and the location of these restriction sites are very specific for each bacteria, and the patterns that we get can be compared with the standard strains. Okay, but these all techniques and specificity comes at the cost of huge setup cost, and thus are very not economical for the use. But much work is going on worldwide to make it applicable and economic for the use in common labs, so that these techniques can be explored. So many companies are there which are coming up with much cost-effective methods that you will be seeing in the further slides. Technique, restriction endonuclease analysis of chromosomes. This technique is essentially, as the name suggests, involves a restriction enzyme digestion of chromosomal DNA to arrive at a specific banding pattern that is called as a fingerprint after agarose gel electrophoresis or PAGE. So once this is done, these bands are then blotted, that is on a suitable solid membrane called either nylon or nitrocellulose, and then they are stained. And these banding patterns obtained after this restriction endonuclease digestion indicates the cutting sites that are present on the chromosomal DNA of that particular pathogen and is specific to the pathogen. Now, in a question that may arise in most of your minds, and you may know this, that most of the bacteria or the restriction endonuclease, the enzymes that are produced in the bacteria, but innately, the bacterial chromosomal DNA or the plasmid DNA is not digested by the restriction endonuclease it produces, right? So why is that when the bacteria is intact, why is that the restriction endonuclease that it is producing does not digest its own DNA? Only when artificially in the lab, when we are subjecting the DNA to enzymes in the lab, then only the DNA is getting digested. The answer lies in the physiological mechanism that the bacteria undergoes, that is called as the methylation. So there are specific methylation that occurs on the specific adenine and cytosine residues on the DNA that prevents the bacterial DNA innately from getting lysed inside the bacteria. So it is either called as the DAM, the DAM methylation, or it is called the DCM. So DAM means the adenine methylation and DCM is the cytosine methylation. So these methylation at these two bases ensures that the bacterial DNA doesn't get lysed by its own RE enzymes. So that is the thing. How to interpret this REAC? So once we get the different the patterns of on the gel electrophoresis, if the strains show one band difference, then they are considered to be subtypes of each other. So for example, you have Salmonella typhimurium strain. So if that strain, between two strains, if there is one band difference, then they are considered to be subtypes of that strain. Whereas if some isolates that differ in two or more banding patterns, then they are considered to be different strains altogether. So if two or more banding patterns are different, then the strains only might be different for that particular species. The advantages of REAC include it is a critical tool for epidemiological investigation, that is doing predicting any disease. Through various field sampling, we can find out what kind of bacteria outbreak might have occurred. It uses the whole chromosome for RE analysis. All the strains can be typed very easily and no prior data of sequence is required. So you did not need any sequence data for this. Whereas some other newer techniques that we'll be seeing further slides will require some sequence data without which you cannot analyze or interpret the data. But one major disadvantage of this technique is interpretation of the data is a daunting task. Finding out the single banding pattern difference is very tedious and needs a lot of expertise, and presence of plasmid DNA can interfere with the reaction mixture and therefore interpretation of the data. Coming to the next technique, that is restriction endonuclease analysis of plasmid DNA. So the first one, REAC, was mainly dealing about the chromosomal DNA. Here we are dealing about the plasmid DNA. So this technique is employed for those bacteria which harbor plasmids within them, and how these plasmids are they are either isolated by the alkaline lysis procedure that we all know, and followed by the agarose gel electrophoresis. So the number and size of plasmid is taken into consideration before strain identification. For example, some bacteria can carry a single plasmid which is very large, that is 100 to 150 kilobases, and some plasmids will be carrying small plasmids with a large copy number. Okay, so the number and size of plasmid is taken into consideration before the strain identification. So an addition, if the bacteria carry a large plasmid, which is like 100 to 150 kb, an addition of an restriction endonuclease digestion step will aid in the discrimination or detection of the pathogen. So this has been used in characterization of different serotypes of Staphylococcus, mainly in the field conditions. Coming to restriction fragment length polymorphism and ribotyping. So this RFLP is a technique that uses the principle of restriction endonucleases digestion for a defined genetic region of the pathogen, followed by electrophoresis and southern blotting to detect the probe. So this RFLP demands a careful choice of RE. Whatever restriction enzymes we need to use, we need to carefully choose that to avoid any inhibitory effect of methylation. So as I already told you, this bacteria innately will be having some methylated adenine and cysteine residues, so that the restriction enzymes that are produced by the bacteria do not degrade the DNA. So therefore, we need to be very careful in choosing the making a choice in the restriction enzymes, so that the inhibitory effect of that methylation on particular DNA can be avoided. Successfully, this technique has been used for the typing of Brucella, Pseudomonas, and Mycobacterium tuberculosis. So this restriction fragment length polymorphism, ribotyping is another type of a RFLP in which it is also called as the rRNA gene restriction pattern analysis. It is a type of RFLP in which the target sequence is the RRN operon. Now, this RRN operon is a conserved operon present in most of the bacteria, mainly involving the ribosomal RNA. So it mainly involves 16S, 23S, and the 5S ribosomal RNA. So that operon consists of these three things. So these operons exist in multiple copies and are highly conserved in sequence in bacteria. So these operons are a target for this ribotyping. And multi-copy existence of this operon makes it a very perfect target for intra and interspecies discrimination. So even you can target between the species, and within the species, different strains can be discriminated. For example, if I show you in this slide, you can see the two different strains of E. coli have been shown. One is the W3110 and the MG1655. So if you can see, the RRN operons are in different copies, that is A, B, C, D, E, H in both the strains. But the orientation of the operons is one thing that will cause a difference between the two strains, although all in the same plasmid the operons are same. So position of each operon as well as the orientation of the operon from the origin of the replication site is the main thing that causes difference between the two strains. When the plasmid is digested and run on a gel electrophoresis, we can see the change in the pattern. So it is a very useful technique for long-term epidemiological studies for predicting any disease. But again, it comes with a disadvantage of being time consuming and also requires a technical expertise. So here mainly what we see is in RFLP, after we run the sample of DNA, we treat the gel with an alkali like NaOH that convert all those double-stranded DNA into single-stranded DNA by the treatment of alkali. Now this single-stranded DNA can then be transferred to the membrane with the help of, that is called Southern blotting by manual pressure, or we can use a nylon membrane or a nitrocellulose membrane as already told. And then this membrane is then treated with the probe that may be labeled bioradioactive phosphorus 32 molecule or any fluorescence dye for that matter. So when the membrane, all the single gel bands that are being immobilized on the membrane are treated with the probe, then this probe can be exposed to the X-ray film, and then you can see the banding patterns on the X-ray film. So if, for example, if you can see this, the DNA that is having a specific site, just a schematic diagram for the restriction enzyme BAM-H1. So this BAM-H1 would cut this, the restriction enzyme would cut at the site between G and C on both the strands and separate the DNA into two single strands, so forming some sticky ends. So for example, if you consider the DNA from E. coli as I showed you from so it had some 4 restriction sites that has produced. So the 4 restriction sites will produce a banding pattern of 5. So you have the first band that corresponds to A, B, C, D, and E. Similarly, if you consider other strain that might have 3 sites, one site might have undergone some mutation. Therefore, a single nucleotide mutation also will lead to the loss of RE site. So therefore, this strain would have only 3 RE sites producing only 4 bands. So when these two gel, when they are run and compared, so you can see the difference between the two strains. So expertise and knowledge about the strains is very much essential here to distinguish between the two strains. So one strain producing the 5 patterns and one strain producing only 4 banding patterns. There is something called as PCR ribotyping, which entails the use of specific intergenic spacer region of ribosomal DNA. And this PCR ribotyping is a extension of ribotyping, wherein, so ribotyping, as I told you, is where we take an operon and it is digested. The RRN operon is nothing but from the bacterial plasmid, present in the bacterial plasmid in multiple copies. So the specific restriction enzymes are used, they are digested. But here, an extra step of PCR is performed in order to amplify those operons, and then the ribotyping is done, and this has been used for the characterization of Salmonella, Haemophilus influenzae, and Yersinia enterocolitica. Because these techniques are so tedious and cost expensive, so the company called Qualicon Wilmington from USA has come about printer called the Ribo printer that carries out the ribotyping, which can characterize a bacteria in less than 8 hours. So if you can see, this is the complete machine setup that requires an inbuilt computer for the setup. So just as that sample has to be prepared and put into this machine, and you will get the patterns directly on the screen. So you need not run an electrophoresis separately. You need not observe the patterns, nothing of that sort. Directly the machine will be doing everything for you. But obviously the machine will be costing a lot. Coming to random amplification of polymorphic DNA, also called as the RAPD. So as the word itself suggests you, it is a random amplification. So amplification of random segments of genomic DNA with single primer of arbitrary nucleotide sequence. So either a single primer of arbitrary nucleotide sequence is used, or you can use multiple primers also. So sometimes several arbitrary short non-specific primers are created manually, and then the PCR is carried out using a large template of genomic DNA, hoping that these fragments will get amplified, because nothing is known about the sequence, so it is just random amplification. So arbitrary primers are created, and then the PCR is carried out, hoping that the fragments will get amplified. So the primers bind at the various best fit sequences. So here the PCR, the first step of PCR is carried out at low stringency condition. So when I say the PCR is carried out at low stringency condition, means the primer can bind to any non-specific area also. So it's given here, the DNA is denatured at low stringent PCR condition. So low stringent PCR condition is also abbreviated as LSPCR. So low stringency condition means annealing temperature and melting temperature is selected in such a way that the primers can go and bind to arbitrary sites and can carry out extension efficiently to yield short amplicons. Once the first few cycles of PCR is completed, the subsequent cycles are carried out at high stringency conditions. So it is also called as the HSPCR. HSPCR is high stringency PCR. So at high stringent conditions, what happens? So whatever the primer, the melting temperature, annealing temperature are a bit raised, so that the whatever products that had been amplified in the first few cycles, only those products are amplified in the further cycles, and no non-specific amplification is obtained in the further cycles. So only those products are obtained in multiple copies that were amplified in the first few cycles. So major advantage in this is that no sequence information is needed here also, because as you can see that we are using the arbitrary primers, and these arbitrary primers are then carrying out PCR by binding at the arbitrary region in the entire chromosomal DNA, genomic DNA of the sample. A major advantage of this RAPD is, as I told you, no prior information of sequence is needed, but some important drawbacks is rigorous standardization is essential, since the primers are random and can lead to several priming events. So a lot of standardization is needed here, because the primers are finally designed by the scientists. So it should not lead to several priming events. So like that, those primers has to be optimized, and these techniques suffers from the lack of inter-laboratory reproducibility. So the technique or the conditions optimized for my lab may not work from someone else's lab. So that is why this is the major drawback of this RAPD technique, and slight change in the protocol will yield some erroneous results. So therefore it should not be, it is not much preferred when you given a choice among other techniques. But however, nevertheless, it has been used for typing of bacteria like Campylobacter jejuni, Listeria monocytogenes, and S. hemolyticus, Streptococcus hemolyticus. Coming to a newer technique called as repetitive sequence-based PCR, also called as the REP-PCR. So this rep-PCR it exploits mainly the bacterial chromosomes that contains interspersed repetitive sequences that occupy the intergenic regions dispersed throughout the genome. So in this, it is these sites, those interspersed repetitive sequences in the sites of those entire genome of the bacteria, against which the primers are synthesized, and the targets, the probes are made, making those intergenic sequences as the targets, enabling the generation of unique DNA fingerprints for individual bacterial strains. So here, mostly 3 different types of repetitive sequence are used that have been identified very commonly in bacteria. Those are the repetitive extragenic palindromic sequences, that is called rep elements, which are almost 35 to 40 base pair in length. Then you have the 124 to 127 base pair of repetitive intergenic consensus sequence, that is ERIC, that is enterobacterial repetitive intergenic consensus sequence, and you have 154 base pair box elements. So these are the 3 elements that are continuously repeating along the length of the bacterial genome. That is why these 3 elements have been exploited for the use. Now, all these elements are genetically stable and differ only in the number and location between the bacterial species. So, whether it is E. coli or Salmonella or Pasteurella, all these bacteria will have these elements, but the number and the location among the bacterial species is the one that will differ. Mostly for gram-negative bacteria that I mentioned, rep and ERIC sequences are widely used as targets. Okay. Box elements are not or seldom used in these. This rep-PCR is becoming a method of choice for typing bacteria and widely used for identifying various strains of Listeria monocytogenes, Vibrio parahemolyticus, Burkholderia, and Haemophilus somnus species. It has been used. So I'll just show you, for example, the major advantage is it has a broader species applicability and it has a better discriminatory power by the use of multiple primer sets, because we're using different repetitive sequence, we need to use multiple primer sets. Now, for example, this diagram is showing you the characterization of Lactococcus, which is a gram-positive bacteria, different strains of Lactococcus, in which we are characterizing the rep, ERIC, and the box elements of that Lactococcus. So if you can see, and the dendrogram is being prepared by using bioinformatic analysis tools on these elements, showing the position of the strain, this CAU 2080, among closely related species of the Lactococcus. In that paper, they had mainly taken this CAU strain and they were showing the relation of this strain along with the other closely related Lactococcus species based on the fingerprinting patterns of these 3 elements. So if you can see, among the same, the genus being the same, and even the species sometimes being the same, among subspecies and the strains, the binding patterns slightly differ among each other. Whether if ERIC is same in these 2 subspecies, but the rep pattern will change. So that is the thing based on which we can distinguish between the species, and also intra-species distinction also can be done. Coming to another technique which is very much in use nowadays in most of the high intensive diagnostic laboratory, is the pulse field gel electrophoresis, that is considered as the gold standard of molecular typing techniques because of its mostly reproducibility and the discriminatory power. So it mainly involves immobilization of bacterial cells in agarose plugs and extraction of the genomic DNA from those cells by lysis. So once the extraction of genomic DNA is done, so we have the plugs of agarose gel through which the extraction of genomic DNA from those agarose plugs are done by lysing those cells, and then the DNA that is being extracted from this technique is subjected to some rare cutting RE digestion enzymes. And further, a highly specialized apparatus is being used to carry out electrophoresis of the digested plugs, in which the orientation and the duration of electric field are periodically changed, which are called the pulse time and switch time. And that is why the name pulse field gel electrophoresis, respectively. So I'll show you a small video by the New India Biolabs, which will help in clearing. So this mainly pulse field gel electrophoresis is mainly used for the separation of very large DNA molecules. In a normal standard gel electrophoresis, as you can see, the electric field passes on a unidirectional side, wherein the DNA of more than 40 kilobase pair move together independent of their size. Whereas in a pulse field gel electrophoresis, what happens? There is a pulse of electric field either passing vertically or on a diagonally opposite directions. So this periodically change in electric field ensures separation of large DNA molecules. So the larger DNA molecules will take more time to align themselves, whereas the smaller DNA molecule will take lesser time to align among themselves. So this is a typical PFG apparatus by Biorad that can be seen. So you can see a hexagonal array of the electrodes placed in the electrophoresis chamber that contains the electrophoresis buffer. The agarose gel has to be placed in a central portion of the chamber so that all the electrodes are placed in the center. So the current passes through vertical axis and through the central axis, and current also passes through along the 60-degree from the diagonally opposite directions. So the PFG techniques take longer than the standard gel electrophoresis due to the size of the DNA fragments and because the fragments don't move in a straight line. So to prevent the agarose gel from overheating due to extended period under the electrical field. So you know, in a normal agarose gel electrophoresis, when the electrophoresis gel is run for a longer time, the entire apparatus gets heated and you can see the froth or the bubbles on top of the electrophoresis chamber. But here, so therefore the same is the case here, because here the gel is running for more than 13 to 14 hours because of this pulse field. So the current and the time is being shifted from them periodically. So therefore, this entire apparatus comes with a cooling module wherein the temperature is maintained around 14 to 15 degrees Celsius, typically in a PFG apparatus. And there should be no blockage of the pipe, air blockage that will this thing. This is the control module that shows the initial switch time or the final switch time that can be adjusted manually and the total run time. This shows the angle and the voltage that can be adjusted. So larger the DNA size, larger the pulse time, that will increase the total migration time of the gel. So the switch time is nothing but the length of the time the electric field is pulsed in a single direction. So for example, if I say the switch time is set, for example, to be 10 seconds. So if I say if the switch time is 10 seconds, that means the electrical field pulses 10 seconds in one direction, and then the direction is changed for the another 10 seconds. So that is how the pulse field gel electrophoresis module works, and then we can achieve the separation of the larger DNA fragments that cannot be separated from a normal gel electrophoresis. Okay, so the interpretation of these PFG bands are like, if identical patterns are obtained, the strains are considered to be identical. If the patterns differ by 1 to 3 bands, then the strains are considered to be closely related among each other. If there is a difference between 4 to 6 bands, then the strains are possibly related and their genomes differ by 2 independent genetic events. But if the patterns are differing by more than 6 bands, that means the strains are considered unrelated. A major disadvantage that comes with this highly intensive or sensitive technique is, although the sensitivity is very high, but it is hugely time consuming. As I told you, it takes a longer time for the gel electrophoresis and then the further visualization and interpretation. So it is also called as a 2 to 3 day technique, because it takes a long time, whereas a normal agarose electrophoresis can be interpreted in within 3 to 5 hours. Moreover, this technique is susceptible to endogenous nuclease that can degrade the target DNA. Isolation of the DNA requires a lot of expertise in this, because when we isolate the DNA from the agarose plugs, any manual sharing can lead to the breakage of the DNA that will give erroneous results. So isolation of DNA is very important, critical during the sample preparation technique during this PFGE. And electrophoresis equipment, as you saw, is very costly and out of reach for most of the labs. Therefore, you might not have seen till now the different PFGE apparatus till now. Coming to another technique that is called the amplified fragment length polymorphism. This technique is utilized for a small amount of purified genomic DNA, which is digested. Again, if you can see, it is amplified. That means there is a PCR step in it, and fragment length polymorphism. So the purified genomic DNA is digested with the restriction enzymes, and these fragments are ligated with linkers or adapters molecule. So these linkers or adapter molecule, they possess a sequence corresponding to the recognition site of the restriction enzyme. And then the ligated fragments are then subjected to PCR amplification under high stringency conditions, so that no non-specific amplification is achieved, and each primer is complementary to either of the adapter molecules. So this technique is a bit labor intensive technique that is not very much followed in most of the labs, because of the linkers and adapter sequences that requires to be optimized and standardized. The two new generation techniques that I shall be discussing is the multi-locus sequence typing, MLST, and the whole genome sequencing. A technique, this multi-sequence typing is a technique in molecular biology for the typing of multiple loci using DNA sequence of internal fragments of multiple housekeeping genes. So the key point here is the multiple housekeeping genes that are present in the bacteria are targeted. So those housekeeping genes are used for the sequence typing and characterizing of the isolates of microbial species. So this technique was first used by Maiden et al. In 1998 for typing the Neisseria meningitidis, that is a very pathogenic causative agent for meningitis in the newborn fetus. So basically here, the older technique of MLST that was used involved the isolation of bacteria followed by the extraction of the DNA from the bacteria. And after that, a PCR was done to amplify those genes, and the sequence, those genes were usually sequenced, mainly following the Sanger sequencing those days that was used. And MLST scheme pattern was MLST typing was done to sequence type those bacteria. But new generation MLST involves that is in the post genomic and the genomics era, we have this whole genome sequence or the whole genome sequence or the metagenomic data, wherein we have to retrieve this data and align the reads to reference the sequences from the housekeeping genes in the scheme and assign the MLST sequence type. So typical workflow of MLST involves data collection, data analysis, and multi-locus sequence analysis. So it is a highly important the technique that involves a lot of prior information about bioinformatics and the tools of bioinformatics for the interpretation of the data. So data collection involves definitive identification of variation that is obtained by nucleotide sequence determination of gene fragments. In data analysis step, all the unique sequence are assigned an allele numbers and combined to an allelic profile and assign the sequence type. And further, whatever sequence type is further that is obtained, the relatedness of these isolates are made by comparing allelic profiles by the use of different bioinformatic tools, and dendrogram or a kind of burst diagram is being prepared that I shall be showing you. So this is an example of an MLST scheme for the pathogenic bacteria Vibrio vulnifucus. So as you can see here, Vibrio vulnifucus has two chromosomes, that is chromosome number 1 and chromosome number 2, and each chromosome has different housekeeping genes, that is named as the GLP gene, the GAIR gene, MDH gene, METG gene, pure M gene. So these all genes are the housekeeping genes present on chromosome number 1. The chromosome number 2 have these 5 housekeeping genes within the same bacteria. So now we know alleles. So now individual genes may have different alleles. They may have 100, 1,000, 10,000 alleles for the gene. So we know, for example, if I say height is a gene. So tall and dwarf, as we would have studied in the Mendelian genetics, tall and dwarf are the different alleles of the same gene. So similarly, the gene for GLP or GYR or MDH may have a different alleles that is present on the database. So for example, if you see here, each gene that is either GLP or GYR, MDH will have a database listing all of the known alleles for that gene, and each sequence is assigned an allele number 1, 2, 3 and so on. So all these alleles belong to the same gene, that is GLP, but each sequence is very specific for that particular allele. Okay, so now what happens when we do the sequence typing? So what we see is, for this bacteria, when we obtain the sequence typing after the bioinformatic analysis, this type of sequence patterns are obtained and they are designated as ST or the sequence type. So for example, sequence type 1 for Vibrio vulnifucus bacteria, that means this is the allelic designation pattern. So allelic designation pattern means that is the number 2. So the GLP allele number 2, the GYR allele number 5, the MDH allele number 7, the METG allele number 11, like that, for example. So the allelic pattern is like, so there are 10 alleles. Chromosome 1 has 5 alleles, that is 1 to 5, and the other has, chromosome 2 has 5 alleles. So this, each integer represents the allelic number of that particular gene. So GLP will be having allele number 2 in sequence type 1. So sequence type 1 will be having allele number 5 for GAIR. Then sequence type 1 will be having allele number 7 for the MDH gene, so on. So similarly, for that particular bacteria, different sequence type number is available on the database after the characterization. So all these data are finally uploaded on the database, that is PubMLST. So you would have heard of the PubMed or the gene bank that we use. Similarly, this MLST data, whatever is being typed by different scientists. For example, the first bacteria, as I told you, was for Neisseria by Maiden et al. In 1998. So after making the MLST typing scheme for different sequence types, after assigning the allele number, these all data can be retrieved from the website PubMLST data. So this is a public database wherein you can, if you are characterizing any bacteria, you can use this as a reference for comparing the MLST typing patterns. So this is the basic outline or our workflow that I have shown you already. So these are the different colors, represents the different housekeeping genes and that specific DNA. So after doing the PCR, those amplicons are sequenced. So as you can see that all these technique involves a lot of cost. So sequencing costs, and then the use of bioinformatic tools, and then aligning all those sequences and making different assigning allelic numbers as well as sequence types. So after the sequencing results are obtained, you need to align the allelic, make the allelic profile, and then the allelic profile after making corresponding to that particular gene, we have to make the sequence types, and then those sequence type number that is used for identifying that specific strain or subtype. So as you can see, this is a very efficient and highly sensitive technique for typing at the subtype or even strain level for different pathogenic bacteria. And then this is a diagram at the end, whatever sequence types are obtained. So an E-burst analysis diagram is prepared by using a highly sophisticated bioinformatic tool. And this needs a lot of expertise for the interpretation of the data that is finally obtained. So the main aim of my showing you this slide for that matter and others was also just to throw light on different techniques that are available in place, as I already told you, and the different workflow of each and every technique and how intensive it can go, up to what level expertise might be required for analyzing each and every this one typing. Coming to the last and the most sensitive and the talked about technique, that is the whole genome sequencing, which is undoubtedly the most sensitive among all the techniques discussed so far for distinguishing the microbes. If I start talking about whole genome sequencing, that itself would be a very long topic. So it is mainly based upon the modification of dideoxynucleotide chain termination chemistry that is mainly involved, wherein the different primers are labeled at the 5' end of the 4 fluorescent dyes, and then the 4 sets of reaction are combined, concentrated and loaded on a single well on a polyacrylamide gel, and during electrophoresis the fluorescently labeled products are excited and the corresponding signal is automatically detected. So being in a university setup or any government institution, I don't know if any fully fledged lab is doing it. It's only the private companies that we give the samples for outsourcing that conduct this whole genome sequence analysis, and the data is given. But again, interpretation should require a highly sophisticated computer softwares that requires a lot of time and it's labor intensive. So after the signal is detected, subsequently the resulting data is processed into a final sequence with the aid of computer software. So even the interpretation of data or making or taking out the best information out of the data also requires a lot of experience for that matter, because not everyone can do that. So coming to the conclusions of my presentation is several DNA fingerprinting techniques are already in place to type the microbe since a decade, but mostly because of its different costs, it's not very much cost effective and it requires a lot of expertise and not much exposure is done to these techniques. That is why there is some of the pitfalls, but it is in place for typing microbes in all over the world. Although conventional methods like serotyping would always continue and would be the first choice, quicker choice, but the molecular techniques are much gaining importance because of its high sensitivity and specificity also. The pitfalls in existing molecular techniques are being identified to make it more refined, robust, and applicable in most laboratories of the world. And all these modern methods has enabled to create a large reference database that we can use to retrieve the information and use it for our research work of all those organisms that have been typed so far. So only those organisms, for example, MLST, you'll obtain only those sequences in the database that have been typed so far. So that's all with my presentation. I thank you all for your patient hearing. I think I have completed much ahead of time, sir.
No problem. So thank you, Dr. Arijit, for a nice presentation. I ask the participants that if you have any question, you can ask.
So personally, I have only seen the PFG technique when I had been to France. Other techniques are sometimes routinely used, but I was not exposed to much techniques. But because the topic was DNA fingerprinting techniques, so I cannot only concentrate on PFG. I had to throw light on all the different techniques that are available right now, and so you may ask. So as I already told you, the major thing was to only